Thank you very much, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. So this is the first time I've actually held a presentation online, so bear with me with some technical problems maybe. But what I want to talk to you about today is actually, I mean, we've heard very interesting information today from Andy Hill, from Luigi Di Matteo, of course from Joel, but there was a different nuance of different materials, let's say. But I want to focus actually today on how do you make any investment in alternative fuels actually very efficient, because of course the pandemic is affecting us all. There's been an investment halt all over the world actually, and you need to make sure, if you are the investor, that your investment that you are making when you start making it again is going to be effective and is going to lead you to actually what you want to achieve. So that is the main focus of the presentation today. Sorry, this is all right. Now it's working. I'm just going to briefly show you. This is an excerpt from the Global Cement and Concrete Association. So it shows us the actions to achieve carbon neutrality. And just so you know, of course you know that, but just to underline it, maximizing co-processing of waste from other industries is one of the main topics which have to be discussed and actually has to be implemented everywhere. I mean, we're talking about Europe, it's a different scenario, but we're talking about everywhere here. And just to give you an overview of how does this look like in the world, this is a study by the IEA. It was published in 2018, and you can see that different regions in the world have different thermal mixes in the cement plants. And from 2014 until the 2030 scenario, and this 2DS means the 2-degree scenario, meaning we're limiting the global warming by 2 degrees only, right, which is already catastrophic enough. But in order to achieve that, actually you can see what you have to do, what you have to change in the fuel mix in order to achieve this 2-degree scenario. So in different regions of the world, you can see that the common denominator here is that the fraction of biomass and waste needs to increase. And I have to make a side note here. Waste, I do not like this this term when it's used in this context, because of course waste is there, but you're not using waste in the cement industry. You're using actually alternative fuels. You're using the let's say the usable part of waste. This is a conditioned material, so you're not using waste, and this can cause actually a lot of difficulty with public opinion, and especially if the cement plant is applying for a first permit, etc., etc. So I prefer to use really the term alternative fuels and not the waste term. Now, Andy, you actually mentioned in your presentation about China and the ban on imported recycled goods, which is very important. But also countries like China, the problem is, even though they have this plan to use more alternative fuels in their 5-year plan, there's no internal incentive at the moment. So yes, they banned the recyclables, but what we are getting from the cement industry in China is actually they want to use alternative fuels, but there is no incentive for the local waste management system to generate these fuels, right? So there is a gap also there, and this needs to be addressed. Now, if you're starting a project in alternative fuels, regardless of at which stage you are, you need to make some important considerations. And these important considerations are, for example, some external factors that will affect your project, like superordinate goals. If you are in a private cement plant, this is a different thing. But if you are in a big corporation, you will have corporate goals that will set you with targets that you need to achieve. CO2 reduction targets, fuel cost reduction targets, and there's a lot of sustainability initiatives that are actually shared between cement corporations and other industrial sectors. So you need to be just aware of this while you're gearing up for a project, for an investment in alternative fuels. And the second factor is, of course, you need to know your stakeholders and your partners. Why? Because they can actually make or break a project if you don't consider how they play a role in this thing. So of course, local government plays a role, especially in areas where there's not a really big developed waste management system. Waste generators, do you have around your plant waste generators, other industries that can actually supply you with some monocharge material, which is more controllable? Are there local waste conditioners already, or does this need to be created really from scratch? And this really elongates this process, right? Who are the original equipment manufacturers that you can count on? What do you want to use? And who's going to be responsible for the complete engineering, for the complete concept that you need in order to achieve your goals? And then last but not least, of course, within the cement plant, you need to check what is the fuel availability? What actually do you have around your cement plant? What types of fuels and what is usable for you or not? Do you want to do any type of conditioning within the plant itself? This has advantages with quality monitoring, for example. Or do you want to just buy or get the fuel already ready to use delivered to the plant? What are the quality requirements for your process, and what kind of steps of quality monitoring are you thinking about? And plant personnel, this is really a big issue, which sometimes it's ignored at the project setup, yes, but especially if you haven't been dealing with alternative fuels yet, and there's a lot actually in the world of plants which are not there yet. You need to get your personnel, not only, of course, they need to be trained, of course, that's not an issue, but they need to be on board with it. They need to understand why you're doing this, because they can make or break a project. The best project, if the people cannot operate it or don't want to operate it, it will fail. So you need to take these people with you and motivate them to actually use this. And of course, logistics. This is a point which is also sometimes ignored by, especially by clients who don't yet deal with this. Because of different densities, for example, you need to take into consideration, and also on the long term, how much more traffic you're going to generate into your cement plant. And is this feasible? Is this going to actually disturb your normal operation? So this is something that you need to see, and you need to see this on the long term. And now exactly we're going to talk about short, medium, and long term, because this is something that once you're starting the project, you need to take into consideration. Of course, plans can change throughout the years, but you need to have a goal on a long term to see where you're going. And that means that you need to consider, for example, logistics problems, reception and storage problems in the beginning, because you need to make a place for this. You don't want to actually have to remove the equipment and move it over to another side because you didn't think about it. And it is amazing that this still happens. It seems obvious, but when people are under pressure just to put a project, present it to the board and everything, sometimes these things get really forgotten. Yeah. So you need to see and think about what are your goals at each stage of the project. Even though if you start small, you're going to still start small, you want to do less capex, that's fine, but you need to have this overview. What's possible in your plant setup, in your kiln? If you have a preheater kiln, you're going to have to do a lot more investment maybe to achieve a goal that might make it unfeasible. We don't know. So this is something that really needs to be taken care of. Now, one side note here is that, as Andy mentioned in his presentation, CO2 is becoming one of the major drivers. Why? At 25 euros per ton right now, we're entering the fourth European trading scheme, the fourth period of the European trading scheme right now. And where the prices are going to go, we don't know. We only know that they're going to go up. There's speculation saying that it's going to go with 30 euros a ton. There's speculations going at 35 euros a ton. And at 35 euros a ton, with oil going about 40, this is a huge driver. So this is something that actually will make projects in the future. as well. Now, as you all know, and I'm not going to spend too much time with it, what the strategy looks like depends on where you are in terms of total substitution rate or thermal substitution rate. If you're in the beginning, of course, your kiln is a lot more patient. You can deal with more, let's say, coarse materials with more moisture, etc., etc. Still, you need to keep your final goal in check, but this is more, you have more external factors that actually play a role at those levels. While you go, then when you go into higher TSRs, this becomes extremely crucial, and this is actually where the focus is in the cement industry, in the cement plant itself. So just to give you an idea, we have seen this also earlier today. Germany has an average TSR from above 60%. Europe has 46% at the moment, and the world has 18%. I know Andy had 5% in his presentation, but I guess it also depends on the sources that you have. Be it 5 or 18, it's very, very low, and there's a lot to do. So there's going to be need to take on this challenge as well. We're going to start, because it's a more straightforward approach, we're going to start with the, what I call it, Central European or the high TSR scenario. So when you're dealing with getting those last percentages of your substitution rate, what is really your potential, what's possible in your plant setup, you really need to go much, much deeper into the process. You need to analyze the kiln setup. You need to analyze your raw material specifications, your current fuels. If we're talking about a high TSR, you're already starting at a high level, so you're already using alternative fuels. Then you need to go and check what are those fuels, what is the biogenic content of those fuels in view of CO2 emissions reductions, for example. What is the burner setup? Do you have only a central burner for the main burner, or do you have satellite burners? What's possible? What's not possible? And in order to do that, you should, at this stage, definitely go into CFD modeling, go into a really very big depth of the analysis in order to really make sure that your process is not going to be affected and you're still going to get your investment to be as effective as you can. And this means that you have to pay special attention to the alternative fuels that you're going to put into, not only calorific value and volatile matter and all of that we know, but also the conveying and the combustion properties. Luigi showed him in this video as well in his presentation that you do combustion trials in muffle furnaces. You see how a specific fuel actually is conveyed. You see how this fuel actually acts when it's injected into the furnace. What is going to happen to your sinter zone? When is this fuel going to burn? And is it going to rain out on your clinker bed, causing brown clinker? These actually are bottlenecks that with the right technology and the right approach can actually be debottlenecked, and you can really achieve the maximum potential of your plant. So this means by high TSR scenarios, the focus is exactly on the processes and material within the cement plant. Why? Because in these areas, you have a local waste management system which works, you have disposal fees, etc., etc. This is established, the supply chains are established, the waste conditioners are established. You need to focus on the quality of the material that you do burn and on the setup and the conditions and the consequences for the kiln process. So that is a really straightforward approach, but it's very, very necessary and cannot be underestimated. And you do need professionals to do this for you. Now, yes, this is a little bit of a sales pitch here, but we do have ATEC is a very, very known company in the cement world, and they can do every kind of modification in the cement kiln that is necessary in order to fire and reach really almost 100% substitution rates. Chlorine bypasses, calciner modifications, etc., kiln modifications. So that's the part of ATEC, and they work hand in hand with Exergy, which is another company, LOESCHE company group. LOESCHE Group company, yes, and they then go into the really very, very small detail into everything that you need to consider in the process and also regarding fuel characterization. So that rounds up this whole idea of what you can really do with your system. Now, when we move on to the so-called low or zero TSR scenario, there's a lot of external factors that you need to consider that are not really directly related to the cement plant. So, of course, you need to take into consideration the waste management and the legal framework. So, are there disposal fees? Is the waste going to landfill the whole time? Can you get the permits? How difficult it is to get the permits that you need for that. So this is something that it's not depending only on the cement plant, but you really need to consider before you're going to start any project. Then you need to consider what's the level of the primary energy prices and also the CO2 prices. And while in countries where there's no substitution rate, the CO2 trading scheme is not really being enforced right now, primary energy prices can play a big role. If you're landlocked in the middle of Africa, you have totally different coal prices than what you would have in a port city in Turkey, for example. So this is something that you really should consider, and this could drive the project as well. And of course, last but not least, the cement market. So where is the plant located? Is the plant working at full capacity or not? If it's not working at full capacity, actually, you can deal with other kinds of alternative fuels than if you really are producing to capacity and you cannot afford to lose 1 ton of clinker. So this just gives you a whole idea of what you need to consider. And of course, how do you start? So this is the roadmap. This is actually what the title of the presentation is. You need to make a waste assessment. You need to know what kind of waste material streams are around the cement plant. What can you use? Do you have biomass? Do you have industrial commercial waste? Do you have municipal solid waste? Is it available? Is it not? Is it already available as an alternative fuel or not? So this is the first investigation you need to do. Then, of course, you need to understand what the market and the technical issues are. So actually, who is the customer? Is it only me as a cement plant, or do I have another cement plant which actually we can bundle up together and really incentivize this kind of investment, incentivize and make pressure on the government? Are there power plants around me that can use also part of this? What are the preconditions? Then you go into the legal assessment. What do I need in order to get a permit to do this? Do I need public hearings, etc., etc.? This is also a long process as well and needs to be taken care of and taken into consideration. Then step 4 is that you do preliminary agreements with all the stakeholders. So as a cement plant, you can sign a preliminary takeoff agreement saying, okay, if you supply to me this fuel in this condition, in this quality, I will take it off. And this actually is the basis for investments to be made in waste conditioning platforms, etc., etc. And then from here on is your normal project development. So you analyze CapEx, you analyze OpEx, you look into what kind of storage do you need, how big is it, the delivery times, etc., etc. And then, of course, last but not least, installation and commissioning, making sure that the staff knows how to deal with this novel sort of fuel if they haven't dealt with it before. And of course, this can be a very, very long process, especially if there is no local waste management system which is developed. So what you can do to shorten this process is actually to start on a short term, and this needs to be negotiated with the government, the local government, to say, look, I will start on a very short term and for a definite period of time with imported materials, be it high calorific fraction that still needs to be conditioned locally, or be it RDF or SRF, which is imported from UK, from Italy, or from wherever, you can really, as a cement plant, you can start almost immediately. And then you say to the government, look, I will do this for X amount of years, but I will prove to you that my concept works, that the emissions that are coming out of my cement plant are not harmful to the population. I will prove that we can actually use this, that it works, that the logistics works, and meanwhile, you can set up a functioning waste management system, or at least a start of it, so that you can actually tone this down with the time, so that you can reduce the import amount of waste or alternative fuels, and then increase the amount of locally produced waste or locally produced alternative fuels, not waste, of course. So that is a ground for negotiation, actually, and to help cement plants get started with this process. And one thing that you have to take into consideration as well is that, and I mentioned this before, is what do you want to achieve and do you have place for it, right? So you have to see, okay, do I need to put this in another part of my cement plant, or is it okay where it is? So you need to have this, even though maybe phase 2 is going to come in 10 years time. We don't know, but you need to have this sort of thinking already, ready and ready to go. Just to summarize, because the time is short, basically the roadmap is that you do a waste assessment to see what wastes are available locally, what you can do for that particular cement plant. You do a technical assessment to really understand the potential of your specific plant. And don't get me wrong, the technical assessment is of course very critical in high TSR scenarios, but it's very important as well when you're starting. Yeah, you just don't go that deep maybe, but it's very important as well. Then you need to make a correct alternative fuel sourcing. So you need to actually specify what you really need in order to suit your needs. You need to try to keep the scope as flexible as you can. So modular solutions, things that you can improve on, that you can build on, and not something that it's, let's say, simple and cheap, but actually you will have to take it out completely once you want to increase substitution rate, for example. This makes no sense. And actually we see, unfortunately, many clients going that road. Yeah. So think really flexibility. And then, of course, quality assurance, quality monitoring, because you want to make sure your system is safe, and training of operational staff. That is the roadmap. That's what you need to do, depending on the stage where you are. And that was it for today. Thank you very much. I'm available for questions.